Hey again, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of Speaking of Sundara, where I talk about Sundara, Dawn of a New Age, my fantasy RPG setting. For those who haven't been watching for a bit, we're still under construction. I've had to stop a couple of times now for fire alarms out in the hall, so I'm just going to keep going, or I'm going to do my best if it happens again, because holy crap, I am behind on recording. But that said, that out of the way, I wanted to get to something of a milestone with these particular videos. It's something that we've been working toward for a bit, and I'm glad we're finally here. Just as I did with the Cities of Sundara videos, which I've covered all of the starting cities that have come out for the setting, we're now closing on the last Species of Sundara book that I haven't talked about yet, which is Species of Sundara Gnomes. And so this is a bit of a stopping point. I'm not going to stop making videos, obviously. There's lots of other stuff in the setting I'd like to talk about. But as far as discussing new releases, I'm going to kind of hold off for a bit until I've got some new stuff in the pipe, some new things coming out. But I might make videos talking about some more design ideas, some more philosophies, getting opinions from you as the audience, what you'd like to see more of. So keep an eye out for those going forward. But all of that aside, today I wanted to talk about what I wanted to do differently with gnomes in the setting and how I think I succeeded in doing that once I sat down and really put my mind to it. Now, for folks who aren't as big into tabletop RPGs or haven't been playing them for as long as some of us who are probably watching this, gnomes always felt like they were sort of an add-on at the last minute, kind of an afterthought. They felt, at least in the previous editions where I started playing back in the third editions of Dungeons and Dragons up through 3.5 and various other games where they appeared in, they always felt kind of like they wanted Halfling 2.0. Halflings got lots of stealth bonuses, they got lots of weird preternatural luck that no one could really explain. And then we put on gnomes. And gnomes had their own sort of weird little magical abilities that couldn't really be explained. They were very good with illusion, they liked to play practical jokes, but they didn't really feel like a cohesive part of the whole. They felt kind of like someone had just sort of dipped into the monster manual and taken out a low level threat and handed it to the players and said, "Here, have fun with this." And most of what I saw for gnomes, and this might be just my unique experience, but I'm sure there are other players who had similar issues, is lots of the time when someone would take a gnome, they just wanted an excuse to mess with everyone else at the table and to hold up a little shield that said, "No, it's in the book, I'm just playing them the way that they're written." And as a result, they got kind of a bad reputation at a lot of the tables I was at. And what really changed that opinion for me, where I would see someone show up with a gnome and I would be interested to see what they were doing, rather than just immediately girding myself for whatever shenanigans were going to come, was what they did in Golarion when Pathfinder first came out. Now, for those who weren't there when Golarion first came out back in 3.5, before it had its own game entirely, gnomes were expressly listed as a kind of refugee from the first world, the world of the Fae, and they were a unique bridge species to sort of. They had physical bodies, they were alive, they were mortals, but at the same point their souls were still connected to that world of fairy, and that made them really different and really unique in my opinion. It explained a lot of their capriciousness, a lot of their weird magical abilities. It gave them a lot of flavor and a lot of pathos that they hadn't always had before if you chose to go that route with it. It also explained why they were occasionally nonsensical and why they seemed to follow rules that no one else really did and that didn't make sense to anyone, because that's the nature of fairies. And I really liked that explanation. I enjoyed the creativity of it, and I sort of wanted to capture something of that going forward for my own setting, but I didn't just want to copy and paste, Paizo's homework. And so what I ended up doing with gnomes in Sundara is gnomes, much like various other species I've discussed thus far, are children of an elder creature, a more powerful, almost deific race that is kind of fallen by the wayside or is less active in Sundara in the current timeline. And for gnomes, that species was nymphs. And for folks who haven't been in their Greek mythology classes in a while, nymphs were sort of minor goddesses of the natural world. They were often described as daughters of Gaia, and they were basically the personification of all these various aspects of nature. You would find nymphs in the trees, you would find them in the bushes, you would find them in lakes and rivers and streams and mountains, and anywhere there was a natural feature, there would be nymphs attached to it. And I wanted to sort of bring that forward in a way similar to what I did with the relationship between giants and dwarves. For those who haven't seen that video or who didn't buy the book, the mythological explanation that we're given for the origin of dwarves is that when the great primordial giants had formed the world, they wanted to finish it, but it was too small and they were too big. So they had to take part of themselves and make a smaller species, which is how we got dwarves, and it's why dwarves are always crafting and mining and refining and changing the world around them. With nymphs, they wanted children, but more than just children, they wanted a combination of sort of guardian and gardener. Nymphs have a very symbiotic relationship with the patch of nature that they happen to be in, and it's a thing of the health of the nymph can keep that area blooming, it can keep it blossoming, but at the same time, damage done to their environment can alter or change or corrupt the nymph. And they knew that they needed something to watch over it. They couldn't be everywhere all at once. And so many of them made these small little helper creatures. And gnomes, much like their mothers, had unusual powers, but they were also very strongly connected to whatever bloodline or part of the land they'd come from. Now, for those who get the book and check out the initial 5 types of gnome that I offered, I kept mostly with water features, but for folks who really like gnomes, who want to see more of them going forward, if there is a demand for it, I have ideas for gnomes that are attached to other parts of nature, making them a very almost elemental species, not dissimilar to what I did with dwarves. So if you wanted to see, mountain gnomes and desert gnomes and arctic gnomes and gnomes of the forest, all of those things, leave it in the comments below. I read them, my publisher reads them, and if there's enough folks who want them, I might be able to justify putting together another few expansions for them. But just beyond giving them a different origin, what else is different about gnomes in Sundara? And what I think was really unique about them is I gave them the ability to change and adapt to their various environments, but not in the sense that I did with elves. For those who have either gotten that book or who have looked deeper into the archive of videos to see what I'm talking about, elves in Sundara are very adaptable. They're very changeable. It's why they come in so many different varieties, but typically when elves adapt to an environment that they find themselves in, they do it over a couple of generations. They'll make either magical or biochemical changes to themselves, or they'll find new partners, and they'll have unusual offspring that'll be better suited to wherever they happen to be. Gnomes can do it in a matter of days, weeks, or months. And the feature built into that for the various species is you can alter your traits as the game progresses and you reach certain, not quite plateaus, but beats of story that you and the game master agree upon. And this can happen for a variety of reasons. It might be the life experience of the gnome has led them to become different internally, and that internal change in them is reflected in their outer abilities, their appearance, all of those things. It might be that the patch of nature that they were attached to has undergone changes, and so because it's changing, they're changing, even if they're nowhere near it. A third explanation that has been put forward is that gnomes are creatures of experience, and so depending on where they are, they will alter themselves based on acclimating to a new environment. One particular example of this is the river gnomes, who at the head of the river, where they have lots of their communities, they might be very, very different than they are at the end of the river after having traveled the entirety of the Whitewater Rapids. But if you only see them in one place, you'll think they're completely different people. Just that's how drastically they can change. And then when they go back upriver or they go back downriver, they become more familiar to what people in that area might find. But at the same point, you might have a gnome who comes from a river who is off on an adventure with their companions, and while they're away, their river has been dammed and it's become a lake. And this begins to reflect in their mood growing more mellow. Maybe their coloring shifts and becomes a darker blue. Various things like that. Or you might find a lake has gone stagnant, has become swampland, and this is beginning to be reflected in gnomes from that area of their skin is darkening, their hair is growing gray and matted, their fingernails are growing out to big claws. There's all sorts of different ways that this can happen. And I thought that was really fun, I thought that was really unique, and I thought it gave players an extra little reason to try out gnomes, particularly if you thought you'd seen everything you could do with them. If you've tried them before and didn't really like the flavor they had before, maybe this would be a story setup, a world setup that would make them more interesting to you. And if that sounds like fun, I highly recommend checking it out. Both the Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons version are linked below in the description. If you want to see more gnomes, leave some comments below letting me and my publisher know. if you want to see me cover other species, whether there's a species I haven't covered yet that you would really like to play, whether it's one that's available in other games, or just a monster that you think would be fun to have a playable version of, whether it's a half-ogre or a gargoyle or something like that, let me know as well. I'm not averse to doing additional Species of Sundara books. I'm not averse to putting together bestiary entries for other fun monsters in the future. It's really dependent on what you guys want, and this is the most direct way to let the publisher know what do you want to see. So, until next time, happy gaming, everybody.